Hello friends and fellow birders, and welcome to 10 Birding Questions, the Birding with Bilbo podcast. I'm your host, Nate Bowler, author of the Birding with Bilbo Substack, and if you're out there listening, I want to thank you for tuning in. We are here to meet and to get to know birders of all stripes and from all corners, and one of those birders is Dr. S.K. Winnicki. S.K. is an ecologist and postdoctoral scholar at The Ohio State University, and we'll certainly be getting into some of the work they're doing at OSU. But first, let's say hello. S.K., welcome to the show, and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, it's really great to see you. And let's jump right in with the question I ask all my guests. What's your birding origin story? How did you get started? You were pretty young, weren't you?
I was. So I guess my birding origin story started before me. My mother really likes birds. When she was growing up in Northwest Ohio in the United States, her father used to somehow hear rare bird reports and would drive all the kids around the state looking for them. We still don't know where he was getting this information. And in the 1960s in Ohio, rare birds were Canada geese, bald eagles, the birds we take for granted now that are only here because conservationists work super hard to find space in Ohio for them again. So before I was even born, my mother liked birds. She maintained bird feeders. She plants native habitat in her yard. But she doesn't consider herself a birder. So I was born into this family of bird enthusiasts. And when I was a toddler, my mom would hike around with me in a hiking backpack. And some of the first words I actually said were identifying birds by name, including American robins, which ironically I then studied for my PhD dissertation. So kind of full circle there.
Oh, that's so cool.
I think I started keeping my first life list by 6th grade. I remember that only because we had to do an in-class assignment to record feeder birds, and by then my peers already knew that I was the nerd who would be able to identify those birds and help them. So definitely 6th grade or earlier, I was a birder.
But it seems like you probably can't remember a time in your life where you weren't into birds.
Yeah, I cannot, and my family cannot either, and it has annoyed them for 30 years now, how into both seeing the birds, but also identifying them and learning more about them and researching them I am. To the point that they do not identify as birders, even though they all own binoculars and they go out and chase rare birds they see reported online. But they're like, we're not like you.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned the rare birds from those years, the 1960s. I come from a birding family. I got to it later. But my dad grew up in Northeast Ohio, and he talks about how in the 60s, a Canada goose was something that you, like, if you heard them flying overhead, you ran out of the house and got your binoculars, and it was a rare sighting. And of course, it's great that they've recovered, but I think they recovered beyond everyone's wildest dreams.
Yeah, I teach ornithology to university students when it's available to me, and my students are often not birders before they start the class, hopefully birders by the end of the class, but they certainly interact with the geese on campus and they hate them. So they'll say, I don't have a favorite bird, but I do have a least favorite bird, and it's Canada geese. So I have to remind them that the fact that we have geese is an amazing conservation success story that we should be super grateful to the efforts of previous researchers.
Yeah.
I even keep an embroidered hanging piece of art that my parents bought my grandfather that has wild Canada geese on it. Like, he had it displayed in his house. He was so excited by them. And I use that to remind my students that we should, at the very least, appreciate what researchers did to keep these birds available for us. I personally love them, even though they hiss at me as I walk to work every day.
Right. Well, I think there's also some fun challenges when it comes to Canada geese, like picking out a possible cackling goose that can bring some excitement to a big flock of Canada geese.
Yeah, right now on campus, so I'm at Ohio State University's main campus, Columbus area, I see all these flocks of geese. So the population of geese in Ohio includes migratory geese that come here in the wintertime, but also residential Canada geese. So the same species, two different populations. And you can definitely see variation right now, even among the Canada geese. Some are substantially larger than others, not even including these cackling geese, the smaller species that look similar to Canada geese. So it is fascinating, even in these birds that we have kind of trained ourselves to not appreciate, that there is so much to appreciate, even as they're chasing you off the sidewalk.
So, not to dwell too much on Canada geese, but and geese in general, but where I live in Pittsburgh, a cackling goose is in 2+ years living here. I haven't heard about one showing up. Do they show up in central Ohio with any regularity?
We definitely get what I would call this kind of suite of the rarer geese in Ohio. Few reports every winter, especially as the migratory birds are moving. So you get the cackling, the snow geese, the greater white-fronted geese, and the Ross's goose. So the cackling to the snow geese, right?
Yeah.
I've seen them all in Ohio, but it is definitely, I have to go out and find them. I previously lived in Illinois where I did my PhD. We had almost all of them with enough regularity. They didn't trigger rare bird alerts.
Oh, okay. Cool.
And in Kansas, it was basically every flock of Canada that flew over. You'd see it cackling in the
Had
V.
some in mixed in.
Same with the Rosses and the snow geese. So I miss them in Ohio.
Yeah.
I miss seeing them with regularity.
Yeah. Same for me. In Michigan, it was more regular in Michigan. The Ohio Young Birders Club was really important to you, I get from reading on your website. And it was also influential in spawning similar clubs around the country. Can you talk about your experience in the club?
Absolutely. So as I mentioned, I was a birder in ways that my parents didn't share. So they already, by the time I was in elementary school, they were desperate to find other birders for me to interact with so that I could, for lack of a better term, annoy those other birders and not my parents. So I was frequently fostered out to naturalists at my local parks. When I had questions, they would have me call Cleveland Museum ornithology curator's office so that I could ask them questions. I was seeking other birders in a space that I could, be a birder with them. We read the Plain Dead, Cleveland's newspaper. Every Thursday they had a birding column that listed the rare bird reports. I mean, this is pre, eBird.
Yeah.
So that was my first connection to a broader birding community, was reading these reports, going out, a week later to try to find these birds that had long since left. So when that birding column started advertising a birding club made for young people, 12 to 18-year-olds in the state, my parents were like, you have to try this. So the Ohio Young Birders Club was the first of its kind in the nation. It was started in 2006, in May, by 6 young people in Northwest Ohio. It was intended for 12 to 18-year-olds, with adults coming in to obviously supervise the kids, but also to teach them about birding and conservation. I didn't join it that first year. I wasn't part of the founding group, but within 6 months, I was attending these bird walks. My first one was a gull walk on Lake Erie in January in 2007.
Just
so
getting
imagine,
right to it.
Yeah, imagine taking a bunch of 12-year-olds out in the freezing cold in Cleveland to look for different shades of gray on gulls. And I was hooked from then on. And you kind of join it with the promise of both birding community and getting to see rare birds on these trips with these experts. But they really quickly initiated us into active conservation work and advocacy for birds. I like to joke that they hooked us with the promise of rare birds and then trained us to be conservation professionals. So in the years that I was in the OIBC, so when I was 12 to 18, I was giving hour-long seminars at the Ohio Young Birders Club conference. They let me talk about condors for an entire hour once. I wrote book reviews to the newsletter that the students ran and edited. I wrote trip reviews. I started writing for, professional birding magazines at this point. They had us on conference calls with habitat managers. I was at the governor of Ohio's house to talk about conservation. I led birding 101 talks at various festivals around the state. They sent me to Cornell for the Young Birders event at Cornell. So they took this space that could have just been taking kids out on bird walks and instead initiated us into this like research and advocacy process. And you can definitely see it, at least in that early cohort, because we're now all professionals. I mean, some of us are professors leading laboratories researching birds. Some of us went into environmental law. Some of us went into formal professional ecotourism, leading tours around the world. So it really was this training group that helped us learn how to not only enjoy birds, but also give back to the birds that we were enjoying.
It sounds like a perfect space for somebody looking for not just their tribe, but also a space that's sort of nurturing this interest and sort of giving you a little push into what could be a career.
Yeah, and just now that I'm 30 and I lead bird walks, just the patience that these people had to help us, they became our mentors, like life mentors as well, right? As we were becoming adults, they were guiding us through this process. I mean, one time I left prom early to go on a bird walk the next day with them. Like, they were part of the messiness that is teenagers' lives. And it was very cool that they had the patience to deal with us, because my parents certainly were tired of me. But these people were willing to like take us in a van around the state of Ohio to see rare birds. And that was very, very nice of them.
Well, I feel like initiation by gull, too, is an interesting tactic, because I think that will either, that'll really lock in your fascination, or it'll just turn you off immediately.
Yeah, like I lead gull walks now, because it's one of the many manifestations of this, like, intense birding disease that I have. And convincing folks who have never looked at gulls before that they can be really cool can be a struggle. I use snacks, coffee thermoses, but once you get into it, it does become a very fun way to spend your winters in Ohio.
Yeah, as someone who birds in Cleveland, Lake Erie, it is fun, but my goodness, is it daunting. I think I was most amazed by whoever found a little gull in a flock of Bonaparte's gulls, and luckily there were other people there when I was there pointing it out to me, that I just stand there looking at this sea of gulls and wondering how anyone had the patience or the eye to find this gull amid similar gulls.
Especially when your eyes are like freezing, your eyelashes are crusted with ice.
Blustery, and it can be truly awful at Lake Erie. But
I remember taking a high school boyfriend to see a black-tailed gull. So as birders would know, that's a very rare bird in the Northeast United States, a bird that when I mention it to Ohio birders, they're like, oh, the one in Ashtabula and, this year sort of thing. Like, it's a memorable bird.
Right. One of those.
But you can imagine a non-birding partner going to Lake Erie to stare through a scope at a bird with, like, slightly different colors. Wasn't really selling it before.
Right. I guess if you know, you know. Cowbirds. I love cowbirds. I'm fascinated by them, and you defend them. I think they still have an image problem. I think they're still seen as villains. In fact, my grandfather used to take pretty meticulous notes for his yard birds, and he described in one of his journals removing a cowbird egg from a chipping sparrow nest in his yard. And my scientist grandfather doing that, but you can sort of understand why people have this negative association with cowbirds. How do you defend them?
Yeah, people don't like cowbirds because instead of building their own nest and raising their own babies, they employ this strategy called brood parasitism, where they exclusively lay their eggs in the nest of other birds and let those birds do all the work raising their babies. And this is a breeding strategy they've evolved. I started studying them kind of inadvertently. I moved to Kansas to do undergraduate research. I was studying how grasshopper sparrows were arranging their territories on the prairie. So we saw in some places they were grouping their territories together, in some places they were spread out. We wanted to know why. So I spent my undergraduate research time pursuing that question. And when I was measuring these grasshopper sparrow males and finding their nests and looking to see if their nests were successful, I started noticing that the grasshopper sparrow babies were often different sizes. So I would go on the same day to take blood samples from the babies when they were large enough to, I could take a blood sample without really hurting them, but not too old that they would fly away from the nest. So I knew they were all the same age, but they were all different sizes.
Oh, interesting.
So I started doing my master's research on what could cause the size variation in these grasshopper sparrow babies. And one obvious hypothesis was cowbird parasitism, because in that system, at least half of the sparrow nests in any given year have cowbirds in the nest, and often multiple cowbirds. So I kind of roundabout got to cowbirds in the nests, interested in how it affects grasshopper sparrows. And so I started measuring grasshopper sparrow babies as they grew up to see if cowbirds or other ecological factors like predator risk and food availability affected the growth of these birds. So I was thinking about cowbirds a lot. I was handling the babies. I was measuring them too for my master's research, and finding preliminary results were that cowbirds weren't really affecting the growth of the sparrow babies. That these sparrows have clearly evolved to be able to raise their babies successfully despite these cowbirds. And cowbirds are 3 times the size of grasshopper sparrows. So it was pretty amazing. So I started developing this fondness for cowbirds because I was hanging out with their babies every day, and also seeing that they didn't have the negative impact that I thought they would. But then I'd go onto social media and see, like you said, people talking about removing cowbird eggs. And so I, at one point, made a Twitter thread about why that's a bad idea to remove cowbird eggs, both ethically, because you're killing a native species when you're doing that, but also bad for the host species, because visiting nests can convince host parents that there's predators nearby. They can abandon their nests. Birds know how to count, so if you pull an egg out of the nest, they're going to think, oh, a snake came and ate an egg. Is it worth investing more time knowing that a snake is probably going to come back? And we saw that all the time in the prairie. Snakes would grab 1 egg or 1 baby a day for 4 days. And then, so I started trying to convince people to not hurt cowbirds for all of these reasons. And it kind of launched into this side quest of mine that I now give talks to Audubon clubs and groups about why it's a bad idea to remove cowbirds. That even if you don't like them, it's bad for the hosts and the ecosystem to do it without supervision, right? So researchers do remove cowbirds to protect sensitive species, but they don't remove the eggs for all those reasons I listed. They mostly kill the adults with, institutional approval. But I guess when I give that talk, I first acknowledge all the harm that cowbirds do have for hosts, that they often remove a host egg and they can outcompete and all those things. But then also point out that cowbirds are a native bird species. So it's pretty weird to, kill one bird to protect another when these are native birds. And they're actually in decline. Like most songbirds in North America, cowbirds are declining in almost all regions. So you're killing a native, local, declining bird species to protect birds. And a lot of birds do hurt other birds. I mean, predators do. And in North America, more than other regions, we're less inclined to kill predators to protect birds. So why are we so quick to kill cowbirds, but not, your blue jays or your hawks or whatever? Plus, it is an evolved behavior. It's not a moral thing. These are non-human animals doing what they evolved to do. We know why they do it. We know the chemistry in their brain that induces this behavior. And honestly, it makes it really, really fascinating to study. So I've, published manuscripts on how cowbirds grow and how cowbirds affect their hosts. So I ended up first just advocating not to hurt them for these kind of vague ethical reasons, but then growing to really like them and thinking about the challenges that cowbirds actually face, that these babies are growing in 200 different host species nests with variation in diets and parental care, and then they have to figure out that they're a cowbird as they grow up. And we know how they do that now. There's so many interesting biological questions that these evolved behaviors allow us to examine with cowbirds. And yeah, they're a native bird. Why would you kill them?
Nature knows what it's doing. It's always when humans stick their nose in that things get messed up. And I know that there are some issues with cowbirds in places like where the Kirtland's warbler breeds, and they have to have some cowbird management there. But yeah, the overall message, if you're listening at home, not to pontificate, but leave the cowbirds alone. And also, before we move on from cowbirds, that is fascinating how they realize that they are cowbirds. I just learned that. Could you talk about that for a second?
Yeah, so this isn't my research, but it was actually the dissertation research of one of my PhD advisors, Mark Halber, and he hypothesized that there was some sort of password that cowbirds must hear and interpret at some point in their life to make them understand that they're a cowbird, because most birds grow up thinking that the parents that raised them are their parents. We know this from experimental tests. How do cowbirds then learn that those aren't their parents and learn to, find a mate that's a cowbird and associate with cowbirds? And it turns out, after years and years of testing, researchers have learned that they do hear this call, this chatter call that adult cowbirds give, right? A vocalization that they give that unlocks the cowbird's identity in their brain, changes the protein expression in these birds' brain, and they suddenly then start associating with other cowbirds and knowing that they're a cowbird. So it's just really, really neat that this evolved behavior ended up being the root cause of this behavior was this very cool sci-fi sounding root. And I love it.
I wonder if they've observed this in other brood parasites?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I would hope that folks, if they don't already know, are looking into it, because it is pretty sweet.
I'd love to hear more about that with other species. You say on your website that you're interested in understanding animals as individuals. That's an interesting phrase, and I'd like to hear more about it.
Yeah. So I guess this sort of stems again from my childhood when, you're faced with the vast diversity of birds available in your backyard, and Ohio is a great place to see birds. So there were many of them, seen over 100 species in my mom's yard. And you start learning to identify them. You've got bird guides that show you, typical plumage variation in these birds. You have bird biology books that teach you about the bird's behavior and what we know about them. And once I learned more and more of that information, I started to notice the weirdos, for lack of a better term, like the individuals whose plumage didn't match what was expected in the books.
Within a species?
Yeah,
okay.
So a cardinal that looked slightly different than what I expected cardinals to look like, or birds performing a behavior that I hadn't read about. I would go to these experts in the Ohio Young Birders Club, these adults that were helping us, and I'd ask them about these behaviors. And more often than not, they'd say, we have no idea, right? So I went to college to be a historian because I didn't want my hobby to be my job in case my job was a bummer. I didn't want it to ruin my hobby. So I'm like, I'm not going to study birds professionally. I'm going to be a historian who goes out birding in my spare time. So I do have a history degree and I wrote a history thesis, but obviously I'm a biologist now because I just couldn't resist. Because every time I had these questions, people would say, we don't really know. Somebody should research that. And I guess that person is going to have to be me. And so I started studying these questions, not about how two bird species are different from each other, as much as how two individuals in the same species could be different from each other. What environmental conditions would lead them to have differences in their phenotype, which is a fancy word for how they look and how they act. So environmental effects, like the effects of predation and cowbird competition and food availability on grasshopper sparrow growth, right? But then the more I studied that, the more I wondered, okay, so how does having a different amount of food lead to a different sized grasshopper sparrow baby? So for my PhD, I started looking into the physiology, so how our bodies function and work, so how hormones that are passed from a parent bird to their offspring through their egg affect the growth of the babies and affect their ability to compete with their siblings and things like that. So my career has been spent looking for the weirdos and trying to figure out what biological root gave rise to their interesting behaviors and appearances. And it has led me, to walk around campus and think a lot about individual Canada geese.
Yeah. And such a convenient species to observe. Could you name a specific example that you recently noticed of what you're talking about?
Of the geese specifically?
Sure, geese. Yeah.
Lately, I've just been noticing size in the Canada geese. And we know a lot of that is genetic. So there are subspecies of Canada geese that are slightly different sizes than others. But there's also just cool individual variation. I don't know if you've ever seen Canada geese that look like they have like little white spectacles or like eyebrows, which is like a phenotype variation that occurs occasionally.
I'll be looking for it now.
Yeah, every time I see one, I'm just like, oh, look, a bird with glasses. The coolest individual bird I saw recently was not a goose, but I was helping a friend catch birds for her research. Her name's Nancy Ransom. She was working in Appalachia in Pennsylvania. So we were in Pymatuning area catching birds for her research. And we caught an eastern towhee that we think is a bilateral gynandromorph, which is a super fancy word to say that the bird looks like on one half of the body, it is a female individual, and on the other half, it looks like a male.
I've heard of this, yep.
This happens when very, very early in development, two embryos fuse. One has female-type chromosomes, one has male-type chromosomes, and you get a bird that's half and half. It's super rare in the wild, probably not as rare as we think, but a lot of birds, you can't see sexual dimorphism. So towhees are one species that the females and males do look different. And so this bird looked half female, half male. So it was such a miraculous bird to even get to see. But the fact that we caught it, so I got to hold it, was really, really cool.
Wow.
And we took so many pictures of this individual who I'm sure was like, why are these researchers so excited by me? And then sent it on its way to continue migration. So hopefully that towhee's doing well.
Do you have pictures on your website of that bird?
Not on my website, actually. I do have it on social media.
Okay.
And the research was funded through the National Aviary. So they have a press release about that bird.
Here in Pittsburgh.
Yes, and Nancy Ransom, who was leading the banding effort, just recently extracted DNA from feathers we took on both sides of the bird's body. Because feathers grow back, it's an easy way to take DNA without hurting the birds at all. And so hopefully those feathers will show that there are different chromosome types in the different sides of this bird's body, which would be confirmation that this plumage type is truly a bilateral gynandromorph individual. But we were so excited to see that bird.
This is also fascinating. So one strange thing I observed, I think it was last fall, and I don't know if this would fall under what you're describing in your research, this is a behavior, was a song sparrow at one of my patches here, out in the open singing, but singing exactly like a house finch.
That's amazing.
And I couldn't quite believe it if I didn't see it.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff I love, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, think of how much we know humans vary, right? And how we act and how we look. Like, every species has that same potential. We just need to study them more. But especially in bird song, because a lot of bird song is learned. So, like we said, most birds are raised by their parents. And so birds learn their bird song in the nest. And if they don't hear the correct song, they can develop a song that doesn't sound similar. So maybe your bird, heard a house finch instead of the parent sparrow during that song crystallization window, which is very cool.
Yeah, it was very cool. Never saw it again, but I got to spend some time with that bird. It was really cool. Boy, we just talk about this stuff forever. You also talk a great deal about outreach on your website. What are the goals of your outreach, and what are the channels you use?
Yeah, I guess I'll give my professional answer first, which is that, from my early work with the Ohio Young Birders Club, it was instilled in me that any research that doesn't reach the public, that doesn't reach the people who actually make habitat management decisions and make decisions that affect birds, is completely worthless. So any any science study that stays trapped in the ivory tower and doesn't have the capacity to make real world impact, what's the point of doing it, right? So outreach is a option for me to, share my research, which benefits researchers because it keeps the public engaged in our work and in the funding that we require to do our work, but then also helps people notice things in their backyard, helps people engage with the birds in their yard, helps inform the decisions that humans make to prevent further harm to birds. That's my professional answer. My less professional answer is that I will talk to anyone about birds, and outreach gives me the opportunity to do that. Like, all I want to do is share bird facts, and teaching is really lovely, especially when, a lot of research, we like to think of, going out into the field and looking at birds and catching them. Like, a lot of my work is sitting behind a computer, writing code to analyze my data. It can get really wearying. And so teaching gives me the opportunity to have fun and to share these things, to remind myself of why I liked doing this, why I've been doing this my whole life. And so I'm constantly trying to find ways to reach audiences, both to help science and help birds, but also just because I like it.
Well, I think a lot of birders are solitary creatures. It sounds like you're more of a social birder.
I'm so extroverted. I'm such a bad birding stereotype in that, like, I'm super chatty to the point that I'm, like, unwelcome on a lot of birding hikes because everyone's like, you need to stop sharing bird facts. We want to listen for birds. And I am not a morning person. So every time I see an article, like, if you want a bird, you got to be up early. It's like, I never go out before, like, 9 a.m. Like, birds still are there. They live out there, little harder to spot sometimes, but
that's a sweet spot for me. Is like 9 to 11.
Yeah.
Anything else is a struggle. Well, just quickly, you mentioned wanting to be a historian because you didn't want your hobby to become a bummer of a job. I guess you kind of covered this, but what is it like when your hobby becomes your job? What does your birding look like? How do you get your birding done?
Yeah, I mean, part of it is that I get paid cash money to go out and look at birds, which is amazing. And in graduate school, you don't get paid a lot of cash money, but my job was being out in the prairie all day long, 7 days a week for 5 straight months. You see so many cool, birds, but also flowers and wildlife. Like, it was amazing. I won't say it's not hard work. I broke my foot out there, like things like that. It's not easy, but it's amazing that is my job, is to go out and watch birds. Or to, for my PhD, I did a lot of work in the lab. So I was raising birds in a laboratory. Like, that sort of stuff is amazing. When I'm teaching, I'm often teaching classes about birds. So my job is taking people out birdwatching, which is lovely. But it's still a job. So it's still super stressful sometimes. It's still, I need to be teaching. I can't be running to chase a rarity. And that has certainly happened to me. We were leading bird walks in the ornithology class I was teaching, with the goal that for the final class, the students would be taken out into the field. I would point out birds and they would have to identify them as a quiz. Students are stressed about it. We've been going to the same location over and over, so they're used to the local birds. They've had practice. The morning of that quiz, I went to pick up a van to drive all my students to the local park. My phone buzzed. There was a ruff, the rare Eurasian bird species, in the county, driving distance from my location, and we had to choose between doing our jobs, leading a bird walk, and chasing this rare bird. And my co-teacher and I definitely had to walk through, like, the ethics of, telling the class that instead of this quiz that they've been stressing about for weeks, we were just going to go to a mudflat to see a single rare shorebird. And we decided that wasn't ethical, so we did take them out and led the most excruciating bird walk I've ever had to lead, especially because the students are birders too by this point. They also want to see the ruff.
Also want to see it.
And it was like May. It was a beautiful migration day. We, had warblers singing all around us. And the fact that I was, like, resenting it. And we ended up dropping students back off on campus, driving directly to the rough spot. It had flown 15 minutes before we got there. It was never seen again. It's like, So
it hurts. It hurts me. It hurts me now hearing the story.
And really, really hot migration days, I have definitely made the calculation that, like, I can go into work a little late. I'll just stay late, get my full work day in, and then I'm out at the park. And then I run into, like, other ornithologists, like my boss, who are like, why aren't you in the office? I'm like, you aren't either.
Why aren't you?
Like, so there's definitely a conflict sometimes. For my PhD work, I specifically scheduled the type of project that could take place in the afternoon. Because I was studying robins, they nest as early as March. I knew that I would never get out for migrating warblers if I was doing morning fieldwork. So I specifically chose a research question that could be addressed in the afternoon, so I could bird in the mornings and then go out to study birds in the afternoon.
So a lot of planning, a lot of strategizing to get your birding in while also getting your job done. But yeah, that's a rough one.
It would have been a lifer for me.
Yeah.
I was keeping a county list, so now most of the people in the county saw it, but I didn't. So frustrating.
So I was looking at your photographs on your website, and I noticed when I scrolled to the bottom, it was getting into 2012, and it was Galapagos. That's a kind of a bucket list trip. I'd like to hear about that trip, because you were pretty young when you took that trip.
I was. I turned 18 in the Galapagos Islands. And it was wonderful. I'd mentioned how I gave presentations at conferences as a kid. And so I was at one of these Ohio Young Birders Club conferences, and I had lunch with a guy who asked me, if you could go anywhere in the world to see a bird, where would you want to go? And so I said, Galapagos Islands, birders bucket list sort of thing. Turns out, unbeknownst to 14-year-old me, he was the head of a tour company, Wildside Nature Tours out of Philadelphia. And as part of promoting his company and the Ohio Young Birders Club, he had already agreed to ask every speaker if they wanted an internship with his company. And so I did not know at the time that that was my decision on where in the world I wanted to travel with this free internship with his company. I couldn't get on the trip until I was 17, in part because of scheduling issues. It was unusual to have a single woman go on those trips that I could room with. So it took us a while to get me on the trip. But my parents, before I had a cell phone, sent me down to Ecuador by myself to join this tour with a guy that they had never met before. So I spent 3 weeks in the Galapagos Islands. I turned 18 on the islands, which is very cool.
That is.
And I got a free trip to the Galapagos Islands through this partnership with the Ohio Young Birders Club.
How long of a trip was it?
Amazing. It was about, I think, 2.5 weeks on the islands. And then we spent a couple days exploring Quito and the cloud forest in Ecuador. And it was right before I went to college. So it was July and August. And then I went to college that September. And again, this is when I thought I was going to be a historian. In part because I was in high school classes with biology teachers who didn't believe in evolution and taught it as this kind of fringe theory. And when I went to the Galapagos Islands and I went to the museums dedicated to Darwin's work on the islands, when I saw evolutionary biologists working there, and I realized that it wasn't a fringe thing, it was something I could study, and this cool, side obsession of mine was actually a career. I think I was, in the museum in the Galapagos Islands when I'm wait, I can do this? And, 12 years later, I'm an evolutionary biologist.
Well, it was a life-changing trip.
It was.
Not just because you saw amazing birds, which I do want to ask you about. What are some of the species that were truly the most memorable?
Again, I was young when I went down, right? So a lot of these bird species, I saw penguins for the first time in the wild. I saw flamingos for the first time in the wild. And obviously Galapagos penguins are endemic there, so you can't see them anywhere else. Got to snorkel with them. That was pretty cool.
Wow.
Got to, swim with blue-footed boobies.
Wow.
Saw most of the Darwin's finches, so the different finch species on the island that are so important to my career as an evolutionary biologist. There weren't many that I really missed that I wanted. We didn't get the flightless cormorants because we didn't go north enough for those. Okay. I saw Galapagos petrel moving between some of the islands, birds that are hard to get even there.
Wow.
They were pretty amazing.
Yeah. Wow, what an opportunity that was. My goodness.
Just amazing.
What's your latest life bird?
My latest lifer was last fall. So in October in Avon Lake, Ohio, there was a one-day wonder, a groove-billed ani, a bird that you're excited to see in Texas, that just happened to show up in Ohio in like suburban backyard Ohio. And I was unemployed at the time because that's how academia life works. And so I was chasing rare birds because I did not have anything else to do during the day. And so I called up my father, who lives in Cleveland, and he met me there. So not only did I get this very cool bird, but I got to share it with my dad, who doesn't chase rare birds on his own, but will go with me as an excuse to hang out. And it was in my aunt's neighborhood, so my dad's sister, who I generally only see on the holidays. So we ended up, not only did I share it with my father, I shared it with them. We all went out for dinner. It was a very cool bird. I'm very grateful that I got to be part of the group that saw it because it wasn't seen after that day. And I like anis. They're cooperative breeders. They're a really neat species biologically. So to see it in Ohio with family was really lovely.
That is a cool one, and I do remember that bird showing up because I have Ohio rare bird alerts on, and I often chase them. I don't know why I didn't go after that one, because that's a pretty amazing one to show up in Avon Lake.
Yeah, it was. The one before that was a rough in Ohio, so I had 2 good chase rare birds in Ohio within like a week and a half. So
that is a cool bird to have on your Ohio list for sure.
Yes,
it's a bird that somehow I can't get my head around the fact that it's a type of a cuckoo, right? It's related to cuckoo, so related to roadrunner. There's such wild variation in those species.
Yeah, very, very cool.
Do you keep close track of your life list? What's your life count?
Yeah, so my worldwide count is 571, with the caveat that I do not get out of the ABA region. So I do care a little bit more about the birds that I see in the American Birding Association region, and that's 497. I was up over 500, and then I lost lifers when they lumped species, so I'm waiting to hit 500 again. I haven't had the resources to travel for birding for I was in college for 12 years, so for the past 12 years of college, and so I became much more obsessed with building my lists in local areas. So right now I'm keeping a walking distance list, and I just moved to Columbus in December, so I'm only at 69 species for that walking distance list. So excited for spring migration.
Oh yeah.
For that list.
Shoot
and my
up in a
yard
hurry.
list. Yeah. I don't know, I'm a scientist. I like keeping lists and data in general. So I've been keeping, like I said, a life list since I was like a 5th grader. Scrawled in the margins of my first edition Sibley guide.
That's how you did it back then. That's how I still do it. In my Peterson guide. I love writing in the marginalia. So which ones did you lose? Did you lose, let me guess, you must have lost a hoary redpoll.
I didn't. I hadn't seen hoary.
Okay.
But I did get a pack slope flycatcher, Pacific slope flycatcher, 2 weeks before they announced the lump.
Oh.
So it was like the shortest lived lifer I've ever gotten. When I saw it in LA, I was there for 24 hours for a birding event. I was on a panel, so they flew me into LA. I got to bird for a few hours, and they flew me back to Illinois. And in that time, I got a few lifers, including that flycatcher. And then within 2 weeks, they had removed it from my life list.
You had it and they took it away. So unfair. Current dream destination for birding?
I would love to go to the Galapagos again, in part because I wasn't a photographer when I went down there. And they're very, very tame birds. So it's a photographer's dream. But I am just getting more and more hooked on finding birds locally and in the ABA region. And my goal is to just fill out the entire Sibley guide to North America that I had as a kid. I want to see those ABA region birds more than anything else in the world. And I'm missing some big regions. Part of my job is traveling to scientific conferences, and because I'm a bird scientist, they always include bird walks. So I've gotten to go to Tucson and Alaska to talk bird science and also go birding, which is amazing. But I've missed the winter owls, so I'd love to get to Sax-Zim Bog in Minnesota to see those birds.
Yes.
I've never been to South Texas, so getting down to the Rio Grande area to see the species that can only be seen there would be amazing. I can't hope that all of them come to Ohio like the group-billed Ani.
I guess my birding career started when I was 17, 18. I took 2 trips to South Texas. I didn't keep birding, unfortunately. There was a
Rookie
long
mistake.
It was a long time off, but absolutely 10 for 10 can recommend South Texas. Even as not really a birder, there were species that I can remember very well to this day. Green kingfisher and Colima warbler, just really good stuff down there.
Yeah, it's a place that, as a visibly queer person, I've been a little scared to go to rural Texas by myself. But there is a queer birding festival down there where they send you with a group of people so you feel safe.
Good.
One of these years.
Good.
I'm going to snag a spot on that trip.
Yeah, and yes, those concerns are very understandable. Okay, I call this the dreaded question, because I think a lot of birders hate this question. SK, what is your favorite bird?
I also hate this question. I, learned to dread this one. I will say I will not choose a study species because I love them all equally. So my study species thus far have been, American robin, dickcissels, grasshopper sparrows, red-winged blackbirds, eastern meadowlarks, cowbirds. So they're all off the table. I will say I only have a tattoo of one of them, and that's a grasshopper sparrow. But I have more planned when I get the chance to get more tattoos. And I'll say I really like common birds that I can see all the time, because what's the fun of having a favorite bird if you don't get to see it constantly?
Agreed.
So I really like vultures. I've been a big fan of vultures. Locally, we have black and turkey vultures now. I love them. But I'm going to go and take a controversial choice on this and say lately I'm most interested in house sparrows. So the introduced invasive house sparrow species, I love that they are cooperative. So in town, I see them always interacting in their flocks, helping each other. I get to see their behavior constantly. Because they're not native to North America, the permitting process is different to work with them. So there's a lot of research on them because they're easier to get permission to research.
Right, because the Migratory Bird Act doesn't apply to
them.
Right.
Yeah, so they're not protected. So there's cool research. So I know a lot about their biology. And they're part of this, they connect us around the globe. So they're invasive in not just North America, but in urban areas around the world. And they're invasive because people liked them. They brought them intentionally because they're so human associated that they know they can hang out with us. And in North America and in most of the places that they have invaded, they're declining pretty significantly.
Yeah. I think a lot of people don't realize that.
Yeah, so they're kind of a bellwether for the threats that are facing also native species, because if something's happening to the house sparrows who like us and stay associated with us and are so good at invading ecosystems, something's really wrong.
Right.
And they're especially declining in their native range in the United Kingdom. And so I think lately they've been my favorite to watch, my favorite to research, and my favorite in that they connect us far, far beyond just Ohio and including in history too.
So you've defended cowbirds and house sparrows in one episode. I love it. And again, I wouldn't have guessed that would have been your choice. If you had given me 500 guesses, I would not have guessed that. But I love it. And I love your rationale. And again, it's humans that are the problem, not the birds.
In Ohio, to the best of my knowledge, so my current job is working with historical Ohio bird data. I'm preparing these data to share with the public in the hope that we inspire them to participate in the next statewide breeding bird atlas, which will launch as long as our funding remains in place, in 2028. So I've been researching not only the birds of Ohio, but also the history of the birds in Ohio. And we know that multiple times people in Ohio introduced house sparrows because they just liked them. They were their friends in the places that they've lived. They brought them to Ohio. The populations didn't really take off. And it was only when the population that was introduced in New York City made it to Ohio that we had Ohio house sparrows in like the 1880s. And then like within a couple years, the government was issuing a bounty to convince people to kill all the house sparrows. And so this poor species, like, we dragged here over and over, hoping that they would join us when we were colonizing Ohio. And when they colonized Ohio with European settlers, then they're like, oh no, we need to kill all these birds. And they've been here ever since.
Yep. Poor house sparrows.
And like, they're terrible for native birds. Like, I don't deny that at all.
Yeah.
But they are great for my mental health when they are outside my office.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, I think that's just about going to wrap up our 10 birding questions. Dr. S.K. Winnicki is a wonderful birder, as well as an ecologist and postdoctoral scholar at The Ohio State University. You can learn more about their research, scholarship, outreach, and, of course, birding adventures at www.skwinnicki.com. That's SKWINNICKI.com. SK, it has been a real joy and honor to talk to you. This meant so much to me. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I had a lot of fun.
I felt like I could have talked to you all day about this stuff.
You can imagine we get very little work done in our office when I get talking.
Best way to pass the time is talking about birds.
I agree.
10 Birding Questions is a Birding with Bilbo production. Hosted and produced by Nate Bowler. Alexandra Hidalgo is our associate producer. Original theme music by Alejandro Zavala. If you wish to support my work at Birding with Bilbo, consider becoming a subscriber of my Substack, bilbobaggins.substack.com, and that's Bilbo with 2 L's. Of course, the best way to support me is to become a paid subscriber, which comes with bonus written, photographic, and podcast content like this.
I don't remember actively thinking that I wanted him to eat worms.
As always, 5% of earnings are donated to the American Birding Association. That's all for this month. Until next time, thanks for listening, and don't forget to bird your ass off.